I really ought to put a tie on for this session.
You think he needs a tie, Jack?
No.
Why don't you?
Chicago.
Just decided to stop. Huh.
You started again now?
Yeah, I started it again. Seems to be moving.
So shall I start moving again?
Sure, you can start moving.
You asked me if I had a happy childhood.
Happy childhood. Did you have brothers, sisters? One brother?
I had one sister who was 3 years younger.
Were you the oldest?
I was the oldest, yes. There were just 2 children in my family. And my sister died about 8 years ago.
Dorothy.
Dorothy, yes. And she was married to Richard Strawbridge, and they lived in San Jose, California.
But you've always been in Chicago. You grew up.
I grew up in Chicago.
Did you grow up on the streets of Chicago? Were you
on the streets?
on
Yes.
the streets, essentially.
Oh, come on now.
I mean, in 1906 or what? The 1920s in Chicago. That was Al Capone.
Yes, I was going to high school during the heyday of the Capone organization.
Did you run into any kind of problems from any of those people?
I didn't, but many others did.
Okay.
I didn't have any problems. No.
What high school did you go to, Daddy?
Austin High School.
And that was on what side of Chicago? I know it's
On the west side. And every summer I went to a boys' camp at Madison, Wisconsin.
Is that what, with mountains and trees and trails? That
It had trails and a nice lake, Lake Mendota there right at Madison. And we had tents. And I became the camp bugler.
So you play an instrument?
So after learning to play the bugle, then I learned to play the trumpet. And I became a member of an orchestra, a dance orchestra in high school. And we played around quite a bit.
What kind of music did you play? Was it big band stuff?
The big band stuff with a small band, yes.
How many members were in the band?
Probably less than 8.
Uh-huh.
Later, didn't you play in like the orchestra pit of the silent movies?
Oh yes, and then about the time I went to the University of Chicago, the band I was playing with got a job in a theater playing for the silent movies. And apparently the management didn't like the leader of the band, so he was fired. And a new leader came in, a very fine lady violinist. And she proceeded to fire everybody in the band but me. So that I was the only remaining person in the orchestra that came originally. And I played in theater orchestras for the 4 years that I attended the University of Chicago.
Is that how you financed your education?
To some extent, yes. And I made much more money than the big athletes made waiting on table at the university. And in those days, every silent movie had a little orchestra and an organist, and they would alternate. The orchestra would play, and then the organ would play.
I always thought they only had a piano.
Well, that was much earlier.
Oh, really?
Yes. That was in the Nickelodeons. And my father and his brothers owned 2 or 3 little theaters at that time before 1920, and they'd get my mother to go down there and play the piano during the movie, and she said, "Oh, I don't know what to play," and they just said, "Oh, play anything," and nobody pays any attention. to what you play anyway, but they just like to hear some music.
Oh, really? I didn't know Granny could play the piano.
Well, she played it a little and good enough for them.
Now you say your father and his brothers owned some theaters. I didn't realize that.
Yes, they operated 2 or 3 theaters
Uh-huh.
in Austin and Maywood or someplace like that. But they didn't have the initiative that Ballard and Katz had, so their little theaters never developed into a big movie chain, and they got out of the business after a while.
Uh-huh. I'd like to know more about your father. Didn't he start out as a runner or an errand boy for some financial institution?
Well, when he was in grammar school, there was an ad in the paper for an office boy, and he answered the ad and got the job as an office boy. And many years later, the newspaper published quite an article about the fact that he'd answered a Tribune want ad, and now he was a cashier of a big bank, and he stayed with that bank all his life. It was a very good Jewish bank called Greenebaum Sons Bank and Trust Company, and I was named after one of the owners of that bank, James Eugene Greenebaum. I'm glad he had such a nice name.
James?
Instead of some particularly Jewish name, yes. What else do you want to know about my father?
Well, how was he affected in the Depression with his position at Greenebaum's?
Well, he still had a job, but he never made a lot of money. I remember him telling me one time the most money he ever made in a year was $7,500.
Huh. And yet he had become what? Was he vice president?
He was cashier
Oh, cashier.
of the bank. And he was very active in Masonic circles. He was master of the lodge. He would conduct funerals and things like that.
And the next level up from a Mason is a Shriner. Wasn't he a Shriner?
He was a Shriner, yes. Mm-hmm.
And seems like you told me something else about him today that was interesting. Can't think of it now. Anybody else with questions?
So you're in college.
So I went to the University of Chicago for 4 years.
For 4 years. Did you major in anything, or did they have majors? Or was it just straight
Oh yeah,
GE?
they had majors. I majored in sociology and history.
Mm-hmm. Christina wanted to major in history at the University of Idaho. College of Idaho.
When did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
When my father told me that he thought I would be a good lawyer because I was tall and I liked to argue.
2 generations later, still going on.
So then I just applied to the Harvard Law School because I didn't want to go to the University of Chicago Law School. I'd been around there for a number of years, and so they admitted me, and off I went to the law school. I had a much easier time getting in than applicants have now. There was no aptitude test to be taken. You just had to have a degree from a reputable college. So I went there, and at the end of the first year, I came back to Chicago and married Di's mother, Miriam. And then we stayed on campus throughout the next 2-year period.
In Boston?
In Cambridge.
Which
Yes.
is near Boston.
Yes, so we were there for 2 full years and never came back. During the summer, we just stayed there because money was scarce, and there was no money to take care of a trip home and a trip back and all that. And then I worked for the university during the summer, digging ditches and cleaning up debris in the dormitories and hauling it out to the garbage dump and unpacking artifacts from Egypt.
Did you give up your trumpet at that time?
Yes.
So,
the only time I played was in the summer, but I didn't do any playing during the law school year. And so eventually I just dropped the whole thing. But it served a wonderful, wonderful purpose.
You were saying that you helped build Harvard Business College.
Yes. Mm-hmm. At the time they were building the Harvard Business School across the river. And I was over there throwing dirt around, helping them build it. And the summers in Cambridge can be very hot. It was very uncomfortable at times.
So you stayed there all year round?
Stayed there all year round. We had an apartment that was near the law school, and we just stayed on the entire 2-year period.
Did you take classes during the summer?
No. I just hauled garbage around and threw dirt around.
Not a lot of BS. And what was Mother doing while you were there?
Well, she was working for the university in, I think, one of the museums.
Peabody Museum.
Peabody Museum, yes. So she worked the entire 2-year period that we were there. She worked and I studied, and she typed my notes and all that. Was very helpful to me.
And then when you graduated, I understand you took a trip to the White Mountains, a little vacation before you went back to Chicago.
Well, I think that was during the summer between the second and third years.
Oh, I see.
We bought a car, a Studebaker, for $25.
$25?
Yes, and then drove it up through the White Mountains on a little vacation.
$25, is that a lot of money back then? Or
Oh, yes, it was quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm.
Did you have to save for a long time for the car? Or?
I don't recall.
Was it a new car?
It was a real old Studebaker. An old one, yes.
Did it serve you well? Did it ever break down?
It didn't serve us well, and it did break down.
Just like today.
And then we brought it back, and I went to a dealer and asked if he wanted to buy the car. And Mary was sitting in the car, looking very nice, and he said, "How much do you want for it?" And I said, $25, and he thought it was a real bargain until he saw the condition of the seats after Miriam got out of the car. By then, we had sold it. The seats were all torn up and all that. It was really a wreck.
Then you had, when you came back to Chicago, the Depression was in full swing.
The Depression was in full swing, yes.
Yeah.
And I was lucky to get a job. And
where did you get a job?
in Chicago, with a law firm.
With a law firm.
In Chicago.
But didn't you have to take the law, the
Oh, I had to take the bar examination.
So that was
too.
several months.
And I had to take a review course and all that, too.
Was it difficult to get a job in Chicago at that time?
Extremely difficult.
What year was it? Do you remember?
1931.
1931.
Yes,
That
and
was,
the Depression was, the fall of 1929 is when the crash was. And then this was a couple of years later.
so you were in college, law school, when the Depression hit.
Yeah, I was in my first year of law school. I'd been there only 2 or 3 months when the crash came.
Did that affect you in any way?
No, I just kept on going, and I had a little money, and Miriam was working, and we just kept going, and we were insulated from all that.
And your dad was able to send you some money too, wasn't he?
He must have been. I don't really recall how we handled it. I think maybe I had a little money saved from playing in an orchestra and all that before we started.
From what Mother says, that your mother and dad lived quite well, because even though he was making $7,000 a year, that was fairly good at that time. And your house was like, that you grew up in was pretty...
We always lived in apartments.
Oh,
but,
did you?
They were nice apartments. My mother loved to move from one apartment to another all the time.
Is that right?
And we did a lot of moving. We moved to Oak Park then. And my sister went to Beloit College in Wisconsin. And there she met her husband, Richard Strawbridge.
And that's where I went later,
You went to Beloit?
for a year.
Yes.
How did Dorothy happen to choose Beloit?
She wanted a small school away from home, and not a big school such as I went to, that was pretty near home.
How did you happen to choose the University of Chicago to go to?
One of my classmates at Austin High School said, "I'm going over to the University of Chicago to look around. Would you like to go with me?" And I didn't realize at the time that what a great school the University of Chicago was. It's one of the great educational institutions in the country. And then
Didn't you have to have special grades to get into that then, or not?
I guess not.
Your grades weren't anything special, huh?
Maybe they weren't anything special.
No. Did you feel like you did pretty well in high school?
I guess I did all right.
Nothing to...
Did you enjoy? Were you active in, say, sports in high school and college, or did you?
No, I was more active in the band.
More. So
In
you
the
enjoyed
orchestra and
music.
The band, yes.
Do you
yes.
enjoy music even to this day?
Oh yes, yes.
You-
Because I heard a lot of wonderful music in the theater. Because when the pit orchestra would play music for the picture, most of the music they played was good music, good classical music. And we always had a theme song, so that whenever the two leads got together, we'd drop everything and play the theme song several times during the picture. But the music was very good. But it was really hard enjoying the picture when you sit so close to it. But I got used to it.
Well then, so you came back to Chicago, and how long did it take to like sign up for the review and take the exam? That probably covered several months.
Oh, it was all during the summer. I took the review course and then took the bar exam later in the summer.
Oh, I see.
In the meantime, I was working too in the law firm.
Oh, so they hired you ahead of time.
They hired me ahead of time.
How
Yeah.
did you happen to find that job? Because you were just out of law school.
And just buffed it around, going to most of the good firms. My father knew a judge, a very popular, well-known judge. And my father introduced me to him and told him that I was looking for a job. And he said, "Well, just go around to all the law firms and tell them I sent you." So that was helpful. It got my foot in the door. But there were so many students from local law schools who were having a terrible time finding a job, and I think the fact that I'd gone to Harvard helped me get my foot in the door to get a job. And then after I'd been there a year, I got fired because they had too many young lawyers.
Oh, I see.
So
Maybe they didn't like my work. I don't know.
So this was 1932.
1932, yes.
You're looking for another job?
Then I started looking for another job. I remember coming home telling Miriam that I was fired and I had to start looking for another job.
Did you feel that was right that they fired you, or but did you get along with the people there?
I got along with the people, yes. So then I started looking for another job.
During that year, money was still kind of tight because I don't suppose they paid you too well.
$25 a week. That's what they paid me.
So it seems to me that Mother said you lived in an upstairs flat near a railroad track, or an elevated train.
We lived in a little apartment that was on Stony Island Avenue, and the streetcars were in front, and the Illinois Central Railroad was in the back. But it was a nice neighborhood near the University of Chicago, across from the park. So then I had to start looking for another job. So I was lucky enough to find one with another small firm, and I stayed with that firm for 10 years.
Small firm being how many lawyers?
About 6 or 7.
What was the name of the law firm?
The name of the law firm was Burry, B-U-R-R-Y, Johnstone, Peters and Dixon. It was a very nice little firm, and I was there for 10 years, and then the firm broke up because of the war.
1942.
1942. And in the meantime, Miriam and I had been divorced, and I had remarried Lucille. And then we had a son, George. So the firm broke up in 1942, and then I joined the law firm of Swift and Company.
How did the war cause it to break up?
Well, because two of the partners were called into the service, and a couple of the other lawyers were pretty old, and it just couldn't continue to operate as a firm any longer.
Did you have a specialty while you worked there at that firm?
No,
Or just general?
just did a little of everything.
So I remember George was 10 years younger, so he must have been born in 1942.
He was born right after Pearl Harbor.
Uh-huh.
But I think the fact that I did remarry and have George kept me out of the service, maybe saved my life, because I was a Pearl Harbor father, even though George was born after Pearl Harbor, and I was working in an essential industry, the packing industry, furnishing meat for the soldiers, so that anybody working for Swift, even though they didn't have anything to do with the production of meat, was given an exemption. So those two things kept me out of the service.
I remember going to visit you at Swift and Company when I was, well, let's see, I must have been 10, 12. Well, how old would I have been? I guess 12 or 13.
Yes, between 42 and 52 you
Right.
visited me.
Right.
Yes, you came over there and you watched them take care of the animals too, didn't you?
Yeah, you had me go through the packing plant and show me how, because they gave tours of how they killed the animals. And then
Yeah.
we went over to the International House and had a steak dinner. And I remember you saying, aren't you, like, how can you eat that? You just saw how the animals are killed. And it's like, I remember sectioning my mind.
Most
saying,
people get over it. You got over it more quickly than some.
I refused to connect the two. I just wouldn't put the two together. I do now.
I see. So then I was with Swift for,
You were their lawyer?
yes,
Did they
in the
have a
law
number?
department.
Did they have a number of lawyers? Oh, they had.
They had about 12 lawyers. And I did some tax work, and I also handled their food poisoning and foreign substance complaints and litigation. A lot of people would get sick from eating particularly hams that had been exposed without refrigeration for a number of days. It gets filled with staphylococcus, and that makes people feel very bad. And so they would complain to Swift and Company that we sold them bad meat. And then we had some trichinosis cases too, where people would eat uncooked pork or poorly undone, not properly cooked pork, and get trichinosis. They had quite a number of cases like that.
And how did you handle that? It was their fault, they didn't cook it enough?
Oh yes, and we demonstrated that there was no way you could determine whether pork contained trichinosis without tearing it all apart and looking at every bit of it. And the people who got trichinosis just didn't cook it properly.
You'd have to cook it long enough to kill the worms that are in there.
Yes, yes, and if you cook it long enough, there's no danger. So when you start eating meat, be sure to cook the pork adequately.
I'll remember that. So you stayed with Swift and
For
Company
10 years.
For another 10 years.
Another 10 years, and then
So
I went with a large law firm.
So you were practicing law for what, 25 years?
At that point, about 20, a little over 20 years.
A little over 20 years.
Yes.
Before you...
Then I left Swift and went with a large law firm of about 50 or 60 lawyers, and I stayed with them for almost 25 years.
That
Oh,
was
really?
downtown Chicago,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Big skyscraper.
Yes, big in a big skyscraper building.
And you
Yeah.
had a couple of floors?
We had 2 floors, yes, and about 60 lawyers. And then after 25 years, I left with 2 of the other partners, and we organized our own firm.
You, after 25 years, did you become a partner of the law firm?
Yes, I became a partner shortly after I joined the firm, within 2 or 3 years.
Oh, really? Is that normal?
No, but I got in earlier because I was older, and I didn't start at the bottom, because I'd been out practicing for over 20 years when I joined the firm. But if I'd come in as a recent graduate, I would have waited some considerable time. So after 25 years, I left, and we organized a new firm in a different building. And I was with that firm for 10 years, and then we dissolved the firm. And last year I joined some lawyers in another suite, and I'm now an individual practitioner.
With your own, it's essentially your own.
I'm my own boss.
You're your own boss.
Yes.
It's kind of like a co-op, isn't it? That several of you kind of have offices that you share the rent.
Yes.
But, yeah.
I pay a portion of the total rent, and pay for whatever service I need.
Well, like you all share a secretary.
No, I use a secretarial service in the building
Oh.
at such time as I don't have my own secretary.
Yeah, Bernice is like when she's in Florida. You don't.
Yes.
But when she's there, then she's.
Then she does my work. So do you want to go back into ancestry now, or I think I've just completed the story forward.
Sure.
Except I might add George was born in I guess I mentioned in 42, and he has a wife and 3 boys, aged 5, 8, and 9.
And their names?
And their names are Stephen, John, and James.
One named after you.
Yes.
And he's the one with the allergies.
And James is the one with the allergy.
Yeah, he's the oldest one. No?
He's the oldest. And when I married Lucille, she was a Catholic, and I converted to Catholicism in order to marry her, and so that she could remain a member in good standing of the church. And as a result, my son went to a Catholic grammar school and a Catholic boarding school in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. And he is now the Catholic member of the Elworth clan.
The only one.
The only one.
Uh-huh.
And he went to Stanford University for his undergraduate work, and then he went to the University of Michigan for his law work.
And what's his position? Isn't he working for the state of
He's
Michigan?
an assistant attorney general for the state of Michigan.
And he's been that for
About 8 years, and before that he was with a large law firm in Chicago. And before that, for a year, he was a public defender in Atlanta, Georgia, under some kind of a scholarship he had.
Wasn't George in the service, too?
And George was in the service for 2 years in Korea, after the Korean War.
And he was with the, like the supply division or something, wasn't he? He really wasn't like a line fighter, or
No.
he was a first lieutenant.
I think he was in the Jewish infantry,
The Jewish infantry?
yeah, which is the quartermaster corps.
joke.
That's what they used to call it.
Yeah.